Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jan Harrison, and I'm a volunteer with the Environmental Justice Action Team of First Unitarian Church of Pittsburgh. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an older white woman with short silver hair, and I'm wearing a blue and white striped shirt. We are so glad to see so many of you joining us as we work together for climate justice for all. Our event will be starting shortly, but first a few details. First, all attendees are muted for ease of audio. Please stay on mute throughout the event. Second, we welcome your questions. All participants can submit questions by going to slido.com. That's slido.com, and entering the code number 4032060. Virtual participants can also enter questions in the chat, and for folks in the building, there are slips of paper that you can also use. Third, if you have any questions or issues or concerns during the event, please reach out to Sonia or Bob in the room or by messaging event support in a Zoom. And with that, I turn you over to Reverend Kate Walker to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Appreciate that very much. Well, good evening, good people. Good evening, good evening. So glad to have you either in person here at First Unitarian Church of Pittsburgh or out there in the internet world. I am Reverend Dr. Kate Walker, and I have the privilege and truly the honor of serving this wonderful community as its minister. I use the she, her pronouns, and I am a middle-aged white woman wearing glasses with a tan multicolored designed blouse today, and just really delighted to have this wonderful speaker. For those who are unfamiliar with Unitarian Universalism, we are a multi-faith community that we welcome people of all faiths and backgrounds, and we welcome people who are questioning and who are exploring their faith and the faith of others. We are grounded by several principles, but one of those principles is what we call the seventh principle, which is a statement that says we recognize and affirm in covenant on the interconnected web of all existence. And this particular church has taken that principle into a community-wide commitment to educating and acting and doing everything we can to mitigate climate and environmental justice, which is one of the reasons why Mark Dixon is with us this evening. We want to live our values to the core. So I'm sitting here in this beautiful congregation and this building that is connected to geothermal, and it is solar panels on its roof, and we do everything we can to make sure that we have minimized our carbon imprint and output on this planet. So on that note, I want to also recognize that at the end of this talk, you may feel motivated to do something, and Mark Dixon may be pointing in some directions, but I'm going to give you something immediate. This very Sunday, the 17th, after church here, at noon, we are going to have a meeting. It's called, we're calling it Clearing the Air in the Mon Valley Forum. And it is something that you can do right away about learning how your voice is heard by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, as they currently seek public input on new, tighter air pollution regulations on coke manufacturing plants. And our speakers are Lisa Graves Mercucci from Pennsylvania Coordinator, Community Outreach, Environmental Integrity Project, and Anna Hoffman, who's the Director of Air Quality Engagement at the CMU Create Lab. So please join us as we're going to hear more about the proposed federal rules change on the coke works, particularly here at the U.S. Steel plant in Clarendon. And they need input, and boy, we want to make sure they have input. And if you are interested in attending and you want to be fed, the program begins at noon, but if you want to be fed, there will be a light lunch served at 11:30. It would be fantastic if you can register, and we will put the email to register into the chat in a few moments. And but we just know that it's important to act based on what we're going to hear tonight or what we already know in our hearts. So I'm going to introduce Mark Dixon, but I hope you have already done your research on who this extraordinary human being is. And Mark, I'm just, again, so grateful to have you here. Mark Dixon is an award-winning filmmaker, photographer, activist, and public speaker exploring the frontiers of social change on our beautiful finite planet. He graduated from Stanford University with a degree in industrial engineering, and then he worked for startup companies in Silicon Valley before turning to documentary filmmaking. His productions include YERT, that's Y-E-R-T, YERT, Your Environmental Road Trip, which is a year-long eco-expedition through all 50 United States exploring environmental sustainability. And in December of 2015, he crowdfunded a journey to Paris, France to attend and cover the United Nations Climate Change Conference, if parties the COP2 COP21 as credentialed press. And Mark is currently working on a new documentary we'll hear more about tonight entitled Inversion, the unfinished business of Pittsburgh air. And his related advocacy and citizen science efforts caused Pittsburgh's group against smog and pollution, also known as GASP, to name him a champion for healthy air. They did that back in 2017. And Mark has given presentations on environmental topics to a diverse audiences, including Carnegie Mellon and Yale and Stanford and Sony Pictures, TEDx Pictures, the EPA. His activism and photography has been featured in the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. And more importantly, he's here with us this evening, sharing his experience and his guidance, and I'm delighted to have you. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you so much for having me today. I want to thank you, Reverend Dr. Kate Walker. I want to thank Bob Mitchell for finding me and inviting me to come do this, and Sonia Wellington, Nancy Latimer, Jan Harrison, Becky Studer, Madeline Darnell, and the entire congregation at First Unitarian Church of Pittsburgh, and particularly all the members of the church's Environmental Justice Action Team for hosting me here tonight. I'm really glad to be here. I haven't been giving a lot of presentations lately because of COVID, and so I'm extra grateful to be here tonight. Physically, I am, my pronouns are he, him, and I am a middle-aged white male with dark brown, short hair, no facial hair, and I'm wearing glasses. I have a long-sleeved, blue-collared shirt on. And I can also talk louder, I think. I can also fiddle with this here. It should be as loud as I can get for now, but I'll try to talk extra loud. Great. Okay. Well, so as you heard in the introduction, I did go on an environmental road trip documentary project called Your Environmental Road Trip, and I'm going to share my screen so you can follow along there. There it is. That is our route. You can see it's like a spaghetti thrown against the wall. And we had a wonderful time on that trip, interviewing about 800 people, filming over 600 hours of footage. You know, when I do a documentary, it's not just like I just jump out there and film for a few months and then go edit and then we're done. I actually worked on the Inversion documentary with my colleague Ben and his wife Julie for years and years, from about 2006 through about maybe, it's hard to know when I actually stopped working on it, but maybe 2013 or so. So the Inversion documentary is quite similar in the time scale as that. I did roll on to check out the Paris Climate Summit in 2015, and it was coming back from that event after they had just ratified the agreement, and people were so excited, but also pretty nervous about how we were going to do with our carbon emissions, our climate emissions over the next several years. And I reflected on how I could kind of deepen my activism, deepen my engagement in the climate issue. And as a jogger in Pittsburgh, I knew that our air was pretty bad because I could smell it on jogs and had encountered several people working on air-related issues. I knew it wasn't great, but I thought, I wonder if the fossil fuel combustion that's resulting in the bulk, what I thought was the bulk of our air quality problems in Pittsburgh, if that's something that would be worth exploring because of the climate impacts of the fossil fuels. And we're kind of, in some ways, a canary in the coal mine, so to speak, of air pollution and fossil fuel combustion. And it's not an uncertainty that we are kind of in the middle of this coal mine area. Pittsburgh was renowned for its coal. That's what I think sparked a lot of our industry, a lot of our steel industry, coking industry, and a whole lot of subsequent air pollution. And so I've got this little theme of the canaries. This is a little canary throughout the presentation, all different kinds of canaries. Because as I explore a particular topic as a documentarian, a filmmaker, I find that if I go out and seek the canaries in the coal mine, then the proverbial coal mine, the people most affected by or earliest affected by a particular problem, there often are an abundance of stories in that domain. Some of the best stories are there. And, when back in 2007 and 2008, during the road trip, we had to travel all the way to Alaska to get some of the most vivid examples of climate devastation. Nowadays, 15 years later, it's all too easy to see. Just turn on the news and you can see all across the 50 United States and around the world, not just in Alaska or the Arctic Circle, the devastating impacts of climate change. And so this time around, I decided to explore in the Mon Valley. Actually moved into the Mon Valley, just in the northern edge of it in Squirrel Hill South, to explore the kind of the people who were the canaries in the coal mine. This is a little photo of a canary and a coal miner. So you can see it has a little cage, and the canaries would show early visible signs of distress. They were quick to impact, and sometimes they would pass out or even die if they were exposed to certain gases that might be dangerous for humans. But since humans are larger, they don't get impacted as quickly, and they have time to act if they pay attention to the canary in the coal mine. So I started on this Inversion documentary project. I'm going to play the trailer for you because it's a really good, quick introduction into what I've been up to with that, and gives you a sense of where it goes and what the story is about. I'm going to just change my sharing to YouTube so you can see the subtitles.
Slow violence is bad events on the scale of a disaster that unfolds very incrementally.
It was a people who, over hundreds of years, had been told there's nothing you can do about it.
When I was small, I would complain about the smoke and the smell. And I was told that that's the smell of money. Don't complain about that.
This is Pittsburgh. It's a steel town, and the air is bad. And that's because they let it be bad.
Our air stinks. It's terrible. It's terrible in the middle of the night.
My kids cannot play outside. Their eyes and throats burn weekly.
I'm the mother of an 8-year-old child. I worry about him every day.
It is no wonder why I'm currently using an inhaler, struggling to breathe and talk to you today.
I wouldn't move here. I wouldn't live here. I wouldn't bring my dog here.
On December 24th at about 4:15 a.m., we experienced a fire at the Clairton plant, and it required the immediate shutdown of our number 2 control room and number 5 control room processes.
We initially thought, as you heard, that the mitigation strategies were working. this is massive. I mean, these are massive emissions.
And when they stopped working, we felt out an abundance of caution that we needed to let people know what was going on.
We have untreated coking gas being burned in a flare that's spewing out into our airshed.
It will be somewhere between 11 and 13 years worth of regular pollution in a 100-day period of time.
Allegheny County bears the scars of decades of uncertainty, of ignorance in relation to environmental impacts.
My wife has sarcoidosis for breathing this stuff all of her life.
Our workers deserve safe jobs, and they are worth fighting for. But my health is worth fighting for, too.
To me, this was the last straw, quite frankly, in this conversation.
My dream is turned into a nightmare.
Now people are fed up, and people are tired, and we're sick of being sick. I'm sick of being sick.
In this city, until we get ourselves positioned for the future, we will be smothered and killed by the past.
Okay. Yeah, so that was the trailer, and we've come a long way since then. I mean, like, since the early days of pollution in Pittsburgh. This is actually a later photo, but it's from 1973. And you can see this is Pittsburgh. The smoke is just pouring out. It's worth noting that, you know, I've said sometimes that better than it used to be is not good enough when it comes to air pollution. And I believe largely that we know so much more about air pollution than we used to for so many reasons. There's been extraordinary research that's happened over the last several decades. It's worth noting that the very first, I think, particulate matter level threshold that was set by the government, I believe, was in the early 70s, about the same time as this photo. And they had an annual geometric mean of 75 micrograms per meter cubed of particulate matter, total suspended particles. And now we measure it in a little different ways. We, you know, a lot of times we'll look at the PM 2.5 level, which is a pretty small, a very small particle size. Currently, the World Health Organization has set that level not to exceed an annual average of 5 micrograms per meter cubed, and the EPA sets a threshold of 12 that sort of sets their good level. And so the original threshold that we set for safety was about 6 times higher than the current EPA threshold. But we're really, the more we learn, the more it seems that we find that there are not a lot of increases in particle emissions that our bodies don't notice, even at 5 micrograms per meter cubed. So we've learned a lot. So what are some of these air pollutants? I mentioned a couple of them: particles, you know, ozone, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, benzene, lead, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, PM10. I could go into great detail about a lot of these various pollutants. You can research them online, though, as well. I want to just jump straight into how we're impacted by it, how it affects our health. I think also, this is from the Penn Environment 2021 Toxic 10 report. They note that the top 2% of counties, Allegheny County is in the top 2% of counties nationwide for added cancer risk from air toxics emissions from stationary sources in 2019. And about a third of our country lives with unhealthy air, per the American Lung Association in 2019. About 60,000 deaths listed on Statista, the website, in 2019 from air pollution. Compare that to about 36,000 deaths from car accidents. And I added a new comparison point here in 2022. We had about 244,000 deaths from COVID. 6.5 million air quality deaths in 2019. And it can really impact us in a whole variety of ways. some of which you may know, like asthma and premature death, very well established. But I went and looked for a list of studies that had kind of any connection to air quality issues and came up with this list of things. Now, the correlation may be light or may be strong, but there's really very few parts of what we care about in our lives that are not impacted by air pollution. Here are some of the smells that we smell in Pittsburgh. This is from the Smell Pittsburgh app. And here's some of the physical sensations that people encounter. So I want to get to my next canary, and this is the ACAN canary. It's Allegheny County Clean Air Now, and they've done some really incredible work trying to clean up the air around the Shenango Coke Works up on Neville Island. This is the Shenango Coke Works, and I have a little video that is an extract of some rough footage from the Inversion documentary I wanted to share for you tonight. You're the first people to see this little assemblage of footage collected in its current form. I apologize, I don't have subtitles for this.
June 11th, for example, they lost power to the plant. So for almost an hour, they had an emergency flare on, and then this huge black billowing raw coke gas was coming up into the air. So we have all these things telling us there's something wrong. So who has the power to do something?
So ACAN took this visualization of the thousands of fugitive emissions and put it on repeat up at the front of the room at this big town hall where regulators from the county and regulators from EPA were there.
We're on the front lines here. We have the right to clean air, clean water, and everything having to do with the environment, and the Commonwealth is responsible that we have that. It doesn't seem to happen enough, does it? We're an informal group. We have no budget. All we have are our voices. Even though the monitors may say something else or the violations seem to be in order, but the citizenry is saying, I don't think so.
I just want my children to be able to play outside in their own backyard without fear of what they're breathing in or needing to run indoors because of the terrible odors.
Leah has shared with us they're thinking of moving on soon because it's too risky of a place for her and her family to live.
We can invent new technologies, but we can do it in the service of public good. We can make technologies that cause local communities to be able to have just as much power over data that helps them make a case backed up with evidence that they can take to officials like our friends who are visiting from the EPA.
We've seen a number of these videos. So the event we're looking at just on this one is the power failure back from June. It was perhaps one of the worst events we've seen.
So that gave David Arnold the idea, the concept. He stood up and said, this is totally unacceptable.
We will bring all the federal resources that we have to help address this situation. Because what you see in the video over there, in my mind, is totally unacceptable. So.
I loved it. 3 weeks later, DTE Energy, the owner of that coke plant, announced it was shutting it down.
And now it's shut down. It's clean. People aren't wiping soot off their front porches anymore. Kids who have autism can breathe more clearly now, and the smells have gone to zero.
So that video really kind of shows just the tip of the iceberg of the things that the folks at ACAN were up to. They bought shares of stock. They met with the Allegheny County Health Department regularly. They testified at the Allegheny County Health Department. They met with the EPA. They didn't just meet, they cultivated a relationship with the EPA, and that's what brought Dave Arnold there to give that testimony. They developed a booklet of their stories that they could hand out everywhere they went. They even developed some advanced technology with the help of the Create Lab at CMU. And this little console here, this Shenango Channel website, pulls together things that they were really pioneering. They had all these different air monitors. You see they had some spec monitors. These are early low-cost air monitors. They also integrated air pollution levels that were captured by the Allegheny County Health Department in a console that synced up the time of the imagery with the air pollution at the time, and also synced it up with some smell reports at the time. So they're pioneering all these things in the, years before I even got engaged with the air quality issue in 2016. It was just, I was lucky that Thaddeus invited me to film that event, because it really has been an iconic event in my own understanding about air pollution and the air pollution advocacy in the region. So they had these air monitors, smell reports, this digital console. They even developed automatic smoke detection in this console. They had regular community meetings, and even had some sort of shenanigans, I'll call them. They gave Shenango an open window award, or a closed open window award, a closed window award. Actually, I forget which one it is. If someone knows in the chat, which was it? Was it open or closed? I think it might have been closed, because you had to close your window if you lived near that facility. I believe also that Thaddeus was a participant in a lawsuit against DTE, the company that owned the Shenango Coke Works. And ultimately, their advocacy was shown to be really right on the spot when it came to highlighting that there were really material concerns that the community had. There was an article that kind of summed up a study that found that ER visits dipped steeply after, this is in public source, after a Coke plant closed in Neville Island. That was the Shenango Coke Works. And you can see here a 61% decrease in local heart-related emergency department visits, a 13% decrease in hospitalizations for cardiovascular diseases, and a 90% drop in average daily levels of sulfur dioxide within 3 years after the closure. And here's an image that shows the predicted levels. Closed window award. Thank you, Thaddeus. I wrote down open window for some reason. Okay, so Thaddeus helped me out in the chat. I'm glad that Thaddeus is here to see me try to tell his story. And you can see what the actual emergency department visits were after the shutdown. A really striking difference in health after this is shut down. And so that points me to the next canary. I think I turned my attention on the Clairton Coke Works, because that was basically depending on how you measure, if not the largest polluter in Allegheny County. At least it's risen to that level of the most toxic polluter most recently, the Clairton Coke Works. And you can see it here in the Create Lab combined forces with the Breathe Project and developed this Breathe Cam pointed at Clairton Coke Works. And you can see here during a strong inversion. So you can see the emissions, or the whatever is collecting here at low levels. It's not just rising up into the sky. And this is often the kind of thing that floats into the community when there are stench events that happen in the region. And so I started to pay attention to that pretty closely. And it seemed like there were just constant emissions violations or legal issues with the Allegheny County Health Department. And I stumbled across, with the help of some folks in the Breathe Collaborative, this is a study done by Albert Presto, a paper that he wrote that looks at increased levels of benzene, toluene, black carbon, sulfur dioxide happening at night, I believe, during one of these emissions events. And so this was really fascinating to me, because it highlighted how toluene was coming out. That's a volatile organic compound, and there are all these different low-cost monitors emergent that one of which could actually measure toluene, or it said that they could measure it, which is this little aware monitor here. And so I started to do some experiments. I put one out on my front porch, and then checked the very early version of the Smell Pittsburgh app, which is a follow-on from the smell reporting that they had been doing at ACAN with that Shenango channel, and the Create Lab developed this app. And so I started to use this app to see, okay, well, do the bad smell days correspond with spikes in the in my monitor? And sure enough, they did. So I went to the next level and mapped it out, and found that, yeah, this, when mapped over several different days, it mapped with the Smell Pittsburgh app. The VOCs jumped on days when the air pollution was bad, and even the EPA's map, their modeling showed that the air pollution was worse on those days when the VOCs were high on my front porch. So this is just with a low-cost air monitor checking into VOCs. So knowing that the VOCs corresponded with stench, I started to explore this Smell Pittsburgh app even further and found there are other phenomena that were really interesting. And one was that there are a lot of areas where I wondered, is stench going to areas where there are no Allegheny County Health Department monitors? And here's a little air bubbles app that has just the few air pollution monitors that make it onto that app. At the time, there were just 3, but you can see there's all kinds of stench being reported in the Smell Pittsburgh app. So over time, I, in conjunction with many, many others in the community, started to buy and deploy low-cost particle monitors, purple air monitors, that we started deploying all over the region. And we could then see that even when the air was blowing maybe past this Liberty monitor right near Clairton, which it looks like it has a lower level, it could blow right past it, and the purple airs would actually catch that plume. And often it doesn't actually blow in a straight line, but it blows kind of like all over. And we'll see that with another app called the Plume Pittsburgh, Plume PGH, also developed by the Create Lab. But we can see that having lots of extra monitors helps us to better characterize where the pollution is. It also helps us characterize it in real time. A lot of the apps just update on an hourly basis, and even the Allegheny County Health Department updates their pollution monitors on an hourly basis. But oftentimes the pollution can go up or down much faster than that, and the purple air monitors update much more quickly, as does the Smell Pittsburgh app. It's worth noting now that the Smell Pittsburgh app has now collected over 80,000 smell complaints since it was begun in about 2016. This is closer to what the map looks like now. This is actually February 1st. So there may have been a few more monitors that have been added since then, but you can see here, you can click on a monitor and you can see the pollution levels rise dramatically and they fall dramatically. So you may not want to go jogging when the air is polluted way up here, but if you wait maybe just a half an hour, you can see that the pollution could drop dramatically. And then you could go out for a walk or encourage your children to play outside. So some really interesting things that you can do with a monitor, even if you don't have a monitor at your house. There's enough deployed in our region that there's certainly a lot of information that you can get from that. Here are a couple that I have at my house. There's some new ones. I really like this Purple Air Zen because it has a glowing ring around it that changes color, green, yellow, red, and depending on how bad the air quality is. And I just took these photos today, so the air was pretty green a lot of today. All right, you can even go so far as to start predicting the air pollution. I have a link about this in a set of links that I will have someone, or I'll have a link to this in the chat at the end, but I'll also have a QR code full of links that you can pull from this presentation. But here I started to predict the smell, try to predict the VOC levels, which then has a corresponding prediction of stench. I wanted to know when it's going to stink in the morning. Do I plan my jog or outing or walk the next day, or not? Do I delay a day because maybe the stink will persist? So I found that if I look on the National Weather Service website for mixing height and look at which way the wind is blowing, when the wind is blowing from the southeast at a very low mixing height, like about below 400 or 500, it seemed like the VOC levels on my front porch would tend to spike, and then that would often correspond with stench, so I'd avoid it. But if the mixing height was high on the prediction, high dispersion in the atmosphere, then very often that corresponded with low VOC levels, much lower chance that it would stink. So this prediction lets me kind of think ahead. And this was from paying attention to the canaries in the coal mine. I got the idea for prediction when I went to I believe it was a Clean Air Council listening session in the Mon Valley, right in Clairton. And they brought in a bunch of people to talk about, what are their thoughts and concerns about the air pollution in that region. And some of them just wanted to know when they could open their windows at night. And so I was listening to those canaries who lived right down in Clairton, that it struck me, maybe we can predict it. And then not only does it benefit potentially anybody who's following my Twitter feed, I try to tweet about this on my Inversion Doc Twitter handle, but I also can use this in my own daily life. So I blogged about it as well. So anybody can try to predict their own stench with publicly available websites and information. So all this information is being gathered, which helps us pay very close attention to what's going on, especially as it relates to Clairton Coke Works. And then this happened. Anybody remember this? This is the big fire of 2018 at Clairton Coke Works. Christmas Eve. This was captured on that Breathe Cam. So you have video of this major event. It isn't just a headline in the news. You actually have video of it, which is really extraordinary. I find it super compelling. And then you also have the Smell Pittsburgh app. And there was a heavy inversion so basically this event took a lot of their pollution control equipment offline. So they just had to sort of blow this relatively unmodified coking gas out into the air. And when there was a strong inversion in February, following that, before they had made their repairs, it really hit home. This was a convergence of people paying attention to the issue, and it really stunk during that time. And so record levels of people submitted complaints around air pollution. Here you can see a little chart that highlights sort of a normal kind of spikes in air pollution. And this was the level that we reached in complaints on that day, February 3rd, 2019. Lots and lots and lots of complaints. This is a really spectacular event. These were complaints before the fire, and then after the fire, especially with the onset of that inversion incident, the spikes really went up. They went down again after the repairs were made, but then there were some major events that happened later on that year, major stink events. Here's a little more slice and diced view of the complaints submitted to the Smell Pittsburgh app. A lot of this pollution was just coming out in raw flaring. It's just a picture of it. You saw that in the trailer as well. And then since then, a lot of lawsuits have been filed about that particular issue. Penn Environment versus United States Steel, and that's Penn Environment, Clean Air Council, and then the ACHD joined that lawsuit. You know what's really dark behind it? Turn the light on. There we go. That's better. There's a certified class action lawsuit that emerged early on, but it was certified more recently, Hernandez versus U.S. Steel, really calling out U.S. Steel for this egregious pollution. And then there was another lawsuit that emerged that was focused more on the EPA, trying to get them to pay attention to these issues. Citizens for Pennsylvania's Future, GASP, Louisiana Bucket Brigade, and Sierra Club versus Andrew Wheeler. He was in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency when that was filed. It's worth noting that's the GASP in Birmingham, Alabama, I believe. Not the GASP that we're familiar with and friends with in Pittsburgh. All right, and now I have a clip that juxtaposes what the health department was saying at the time about the health impacts compared with what Dr. Deborah Gentile was saying based on her paying close attention to what I've been calling the canaries in this coal mine, the people at the edges of the, closest to the pollution. She went down there and took a look at the health of a number of young children and had these results. So here's a little video juxtaposition. Also, this hasn't really been shared in this format either. So a little sneak peek for you from the film.
The January 9th alert was issued out of an abundance of caution and was intended to make sensitive populations aware of the chance for higher than normal sulfur dioxide in the coming days while U.S. Steel finalized their mitigation strategies. As you're aware, there have been no additional exceedances since January 8th at the Liberty Monitor. So we conducted an analysis of emergency department visits for asthma before and after the fire. This is known as syndromic surveillance and is used by health departments all over the country to examine the impact of events. This analysis determined that there were an equal number of emergency department visits in each time frame. So given that many residents may not be able to get to an emergency department, we have also looked at the Smell Pittsburgh app data and complaints called into our department, and these have also been equal before and after the incident. We don't have access to visits that occur at the primary care facilities, so there's always more to discover. Dr. Hacker?
Representative Cordes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One last observation. Dr. Hacker, in your testimony, you say that there was not an uptick in the number of people going to the emergency rooms for asthma related?
Correct.
It was the same as normal?
Correct.
There was no uptick?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
At one of our routine visits on November 28th of 2018 and December 12th, 2018, we evaluated all these patients. I saw them just as though they would come and see me in my office. All 15 of these children were controlled at visits on November 28th and December 12th. Subsequently, our next regularly scheduled asthma follow-up visit at Clairton was on January 14th. Unfortunately, 5 of the 14 children we saw that day, which is 36% of the participants, had significant decreases in their lung function. 2 of these children had documented increased use of albuterol rescue medication since school resumed in January. Both of these children were sick enough that I had to place them on oral steroids to control their worsening asthma.
That's the clip. And I think in many ways it speaks for itself about who was taking what position at the hearing in February after that Clairton fire, assessing, the health impacts of that fire. And since then, though, we've seen some studies emerge that I think clarify what was going on the ground around Clairton Coke Works. I'm going to do a little bit more analysis of this in the film, but I'm just going to let these quotes speak for themselves here. This Trib Live article showed it, according to the study, those who live closest to the plant had an 80% increased risk of worsened asthma than those who lived furthest away. That came out in 2021. And then also in 2021, they actually correlated hospital visits. Emergency department visits nearly doubled following the 2018 fire at US Steel's Clairton Coke Works site, according to a new study. Just going to let that sink in. All right, so there's this momentum now. And so I have this new canary. It's like the momentum canary, but you could also think of it as the stuff keeps happening that we're able to catch now canary. And so with the Breathe Cam, we found that there was a major power outage and major flaring that happened in 2022. The Breathe Cam caught it, and the Allegheny County Health Department downplayed it, saying it is believed that the power outage will either not affect or only minimally affect plant emissions. Now, this happened on July 4th, 2022. I believe it was July 4th. And so there were lots of fireworks in the air. It was very difficult to tease out the impact of the emissions that you're seeing in that video. But we eventually catch them because they have a second fire. And other things that seem to keep happening, wildfire smoke emerges in the region. So all of a sudden, these purple air monitors, which actually, they're good at measuring air pollution, but they're not the most precise things. They're not the most precise monitors, not as precise as the EPA, Allegheny County Health Department monitors. But they really took off in California during the wildfire season a few years ago. And then, wouldn't you know it, now that we've got all these air monitors all throughout this region, we get wildfire smoke now too, coming all the way down from Canada. So that really helped us capture what was going on. It also helped people address the wildfire. I certainly was watching the purple air monitors closely. I had some air filters. I started getting some more during the fire, and then after the fire, started to get more and more and more. Now I've got, I think, 6 air filters in my house. We were desperately trying to keep the air at a green level during all those wildfires. I recognize, though, that this is quite expensive to deploy this many air filters. And so I think it speaks to the crisis that we're really facing with climate change and with the levels of pollution that we may continue to get from fossil fuels, that in order to, under certain circumstances, keep your air at a green level, you need to have just massive filtration. It's a lot easier to filter at the source than it is to filter at your house. A lot less expensive to do that as well. It's hard to filter at the source of a wildfire. That takes like reducing our climate change impact. But we could potentially filter more at the source of major polluters like U.S. Steel's Clairton Coke Works. What does that do for you? Well, this is from Raucus, courtesy of Raucus, reducing outdoor contaminants in indoor spaces. They've done some studies using these studies, I'll say analysis. I think that might be a better word to use here. Where they looked at what it's like when you turn on these DIY fan filters, where they slap a MERV 13 filter on a box fan, and then they turn it on, and boom, the particle levels go down dramatically. And when you turn it off, boom, they go back up again. Down, up, down, up. So really dramatic impacts to the particle levels that you have. And, these kinds of things, it just seems like we're at a never-ending waterfall of bad air quality events that keep happening. And there's a little bit of precedent for that with the canaries in the coal mine. It turns out that they had this little revival cage where if you can take this down in the coal mine, and when your canary passes out because there's not enough air, you can just crank open a little bit of oxygen into its tank, and you will revive your canary so that you can go back at it. I think that the air filters are kind of like provide some temporary relief and revival while we go back at it and press for change, and keep trying to alert people to these pollution issues. So the pollution issues keep coming. This is another one that emerged. This is the one I mentioned earlier. This was this year, major power outage at Clairton Coke Works again, August 12th. The Allegheny County Health Department said readings from the program's Liberty Air Quality Monitor for PM 2.5 and SO2 have remained in the good to moderate range since the incident. Technically, that seems to be right on, but we have a lot of new equipment to track and look at these things, including this really cool Plume Pittsburgh website that the Create Lab developed. Really powerful. It shows the air modeling combined with all the air monitors and the Smell Pittsburgh app all at once. So you can see what happens here. The air blows north. You get some Smell Pittsburgh concerns. And then you see that massive plume flow over the region. I'll show you again. Watch the plume flow over the region. These were very high levels, but they went northwest. They didn't, and the Liberty Monitor is over here. So it went right past, away from the Liberty Monitor. The health department did not have any monitors in this area to capture that elevated level of pollution as it blew over the population. And if you look at this is a purple air chart from that day, you can see that in some of the most affected areas, the pollution got into wildfire level. This is wildfire level of particulate matter. Now, how accurate is it? It's purple air accuracy. It's not EPA level accuracy, but you can get a sense that, if it's in the ballpark, you might not want to expose yourself to wildfire levels of air pollution during that time. But you also see this interesting phenomenon that kind of shows a classic plume, as I call it. This is the most classic plume I've ever caught on the Purple Air Monitor network after it's been fully deployed across the region, where you see the closer you are, the more spiky the impact is. And then as you get further away, it tends to dull. The plume of smoke kind of broadens out a little bit, and so it's more diffuse. And you can even see it again. It kind of broadens out over time. It diffuses, and so you have a lower, slower spike as it kind of floats across the region. So really interesting capture of this plume. And you can see that the Allegheny County Health Department might want to consider deploying more monitors before telling people that, of a certain thing about the air that day. But anybody who was paying attention to the Purple Air Network could have seen their air spike at that level because it's publicly available. So people can protect themselves in the face of this pollution and in the face of what I would regard as, messaging that didn't tell the whole story from the Allegheny County Health Department. Oh, also, this is This is the Smell Pittsburgh app accumulating over time. This is a special request I made of the Create Lab at CMU to show all the Smell Pittsburgh reports that have been submitted right up through early 2023. Probably not quite 80,000 by that time. But you can see, Houston, we have a problem here. And the stench is real. And this is a real interesting article that I felt was, it really kind of converged some of the attempts for advocates to, myself included, but ACAN and so many others, and VCAN and Clean Air Council, really pressing for folks to pay attention to these low-cost monitors. And it turns out that the health department actually went and deployed their own lower cost or portable air monitors around Clairton Coke Works, and this is at the wastewater facility, to take a look at hydrogen sulfide coming from that facility. And sure enough, they found that the exceedances of hydrogen sulfide were entirely caused by the Clairton plant. Listed here as North America's largest Coke plant. And so by putting around a bunch of monitors in places where they needed to figure out, is the hydrogen sulfide coming from this wastewater plant? Because I've commonly heard folks who are trying to offset the blame for the stench in Pittsburgh will say, well, there's all these wastewater treatment plants, all this stuff. Well, if you put monitors around that facility and you test for it, you can see where the H2S is actually coming from. And sure enough, the health department did that testing. And sure enough, they found that it was coming from the Clairton Coke Works. And they fined them accordingly. They just fined them, though, for a small period of time, 2020 to 2022. Imagine if they fined them for every, year and a half period since the beginning of that plant being deployed. Say, I don't know, 100 years of this, you'd see a lot more of a fine if they were actually charging them for the hydrogen sulfide going way back to when the plant first started. And I think this draws into a contrast, a sort of a challenge that we encounter here in the region, which is that I think people often feel like there's a trade-off between jobs and the environment. And I asked that question a lot in my documentary, and I'm not going to tell you what their answers were, but my wife encouraged me to ask a different question when I went out to talk to some people on the street, which was, how much money would somebody need to pay you to give up a year of your life? So if you're getting money from a job, or the general economy is great because there's lots of highly polluting jobs in that region, how much would someone need to pay you to give up a year of your life? This is a little sneak peek into something I hope to use in my documentary.
Well, I don't have a number.
A year of my life?
Yeah.
Damn, man, a year of my life?
I'm only 19, but it's like tomorrow. I don't know. You never know.
I would never sell my life for anything.
For any amount of money.
Right.
Yeah.
My life is already given up to Christ.
I can't really put a price on my life, but
there'd be no price for 1 year of my life.
I'll say 10 million. I ain't gonna be greedy. I want 100 million, but I won't be greedy.
What would I do with the money? So in other words, they give me the money and then my life is shortened?
Even if I can't get 10 million, I'll settle for 100 grand. 100 grand.
I don't understand that question, but I'm trying to answer it. No amount of money.
I want to mention that the music that you can hear, the little thumping in the background, a little bass, my friend and musician for the documentary, Michael Doden, has given me some early stems for some of that music, so I want to give him a little credit there. He did all the music for my Rachel Carson documentary, which hasn't been mentioned here, and I'm eternally grateful for him for doing that. Okay, so I'm just about to wrap up here. I want to highlight that I'm a documentary filmmaker. I am not a PhD air quality expert. I enjoy and I love to talk to people about air pollution. I'm passionate about it myself, but a lot of the resources that I've been exploring, a lot of the people that I've talked to, a lot of the work that I've done is sort of building on work that so many groups in this region have been working on for years, and many of them well before I started working on this issue. So I wanted to kind of give them group credit here with this slide that I assembled. This is just a bunch of the groups doing this. I'm Blue Lens, so don't count that on this. But there's so many amazing groups working on this. Millions of dollars spent, thousands of hours of people's time spent on trying to improve the quality of our air in this region. Things I'm looking out for in the future: super ultra-fine particles, smaller than PM 2.5. There's some interesting stuff happening there. Microplastics that maybe we're breathing in all the time. Well, we know we're ingesting microplastics. Low-cost monitors and speciation, figuring out what besides what is in the PM, what are the chemicals in there? Like, what are all the different pieces of the pollution that we're building, that we're ingesting? Forever chemicals in our pollution. I think this really came to light with the train derailment at East Palestine. Horrible, epic tragedy. Benzene, there's a lot of interesting work being done by Environmental Integrity Project and VCAN around benzene, around the Clairton Coke Works. More news on that. Probably you're going to hear some of that if you go to that Clearing the Air in the Mon Valley Forum with Lisa Graves Marcucci and Anna Hoffman. I highly encourage you guys to go check that out. I think there's really interesting work on air quality and the pandemic, COVID. You can filter particles and air pollution and virus particles and bacterial particles with HEPA filters and with masks. And so you can protect yourself from all kinds of pollution, and you can make buildings safer for particle pollution and viral and bacterial pollution in the air by upgrading the performance of buildings. And that will also serve us well for future pandemics beyond COVID, and also for wildfire smoke, which we're almost certainly going to see more of throughout the country. So I think it's really time for us to take a close look at indoor air quality and making a serious national effort to address it so that we're ready for these things. Just a few little images just to show you some of the activity of people doing this work. That's the scroll of Smell Pittsburgh. 11,000 smell complaints. Now there's 80,000, I mentioned. Melanie Mead, I interviewed her for my film, and she's in the trailer. There's some signs here, an activist. People gathered. And so I think, oh, come on, computer. Don't freeze on me now. There we go. So I think we have a lot of amazing tools that we can work with to improve the quality of our air, to prepare ourselves for events, incidents, pandemics, wildfires, and other things that require an elevated level of air cleaning, and move us forward as a community. And you know, this was a particularly hazy day in Pittsburgh, but even on the hazy days, this is a stunning, beautiful community, both physically and within the people that I've gotten to know in this movement and out of the movement, all throughout this city and this region. I love this region. I'm committed to it. I'm here to stay. I'm trying to find a pathway forward where we can clean the air and live well all together. And I thank you for listening to this little mini version of the story. Pieces of this I hope to put in the Inversion documentary. And I have a little survey that I'd love it if you took, that'll help me improve this presentation, and that will inform my documentary film. So if you have advice, tips to me, you can screenshot, you can put your camera on this QR code, and you can take that survey online. Or if you're in person there, you can grab a survey and just hand it back to the folks there. And the survey is in the link. I want to thank everybody at First Unitarian Church of Pittsburgh, and especially the Environmental Justice Action Team for hosting me. Just want to mention that again. I already mentioned all the specific names earlier, but I'm just delighted to be here and happy to take questions with Reverend Dr. Kate Walker. And here's that survey again. I'm going to leave this up for a little bit. Actually, no, we're going to take that down and then just go to the two of us for this. And if you want presentation links, you can grab those too at bit.ly Inversion links. We can put that in the chat as well. anybody can email me as well. You can find me at inversiondoc.com. Ask me for questions, information, more information, links. You got it. I'm here for you. I want to spread this information. That's all I have for today. Let's go to questions. Thanks, everybody.
Well, Mark, on behalf of everybody, thank you. Thank you so much. You are a storyteller. And that's how really you can't change people's minds with usually with data and graphs. Usually it's the heart that changes the mind. So thank you, and for telling people stories and bringing them forward. And very much. Well, there immediately one question that pops up right away. When does your documentary? Do you have a pub date, release date?
I wish I did. I do not yet, but what I'm saying these days is it's changed from years in the future to months in the future. So I'm actively working on getting a rough cut together. Just between you and me and the world, the rough cut is now about just over 8 hours long. And it's gone down from 200 hours of footage. Now it's down to about 8. And so I've just got to get that down to about an hour and a half. And then we've got a film that can launch. Add some animations, make the music beautiful, and really just, package the stories that I'm eager to share in kind of a full cinematic layered way that so hopefully can take some of the messages in this presentation and many more messages to the next level in terms of storytelling and make it extra compelling. So that's the timeline.
Well, and I'm sure in your storytelling, it's wonderful to entertain people, but you're not an entertainer. You're actually trying to make a difference. And certainly that's one of the big things, we want to see is that this film gets out in front of the right people, without a doubt. So we're going to cut our Q&A down a little bit because as we go over, I want to respect people's time, but there is a couple questions if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I'm happy to stay as long as you are.
Thank you. So what are the new air quality horizons that you and others are just beginning to explore? Okay, yeah. So I mentioned some of those, some areas to watch. Ultrafine particles, really interesting here that, PM 2.5, you can think of it as a blob. And it's kind of a small blob, but if you make a much smaller blob, the amount of weight, the amount of stuff there is much smaller compared to the amount of surface area around it. So you can think of it, all of a sudden, these very fine particles have much higher surface area, and it's the surface area that can change some elements of the reactivity with the body. So, it's like if you're trying to breathe in a giant rock, it doesn't even fit in your mouth. But the smaller you make that rock, or you make them 2 rocks, 5 rocks, 10 rocks, a bazillion, billion rocks, those rocks might find their way into your bloodstream, and then what's in those rocks might find its way into your cells. And so I think that I'm looking really, keeping a close eye on research that's moving from PM 2.5, maybe to PM 1, maybe to PM 0.5, even smaller. I think we're going to find new information there. The trick is that the EPA has measurements all across the country that are measuring PM 2.5. So until they have rolled out nationally very accurate PM 1 sensors, it's difficult to do really detailed, accurate epidemiology around it. So it's going to take some chicken and egg happening before we get there, but I think there's really a strong draw there. I think that the more we learn about plastics and the impacts of plastics in our lives and finding them in placentas, finding them in the brain, finding them in the deepest parts of the ocean and then the highest mountains, that this plastics issue is going to really play a bigger and bigger role. What are the additives in that plastic? Are there forever chemicals in the plastics? Do those change our blood, our body, our DNA or epigenetics? We have to really dig into these questions, I think. And in the meantime, though, these things are generally filtered by air filters. So if you're filtering your air, you're reducing the amount of microplastics in your ambient environment. You may get some outside, but you'll get a lot fewer if you spend a lot of time inside. You can run a HEPA filter in there. I think it gets a lot more complicated if you think of there are many different kinds of air filters. I mostly just focus on HEPA filters that are just physically taking the air out with the filter. I don't want to speak technically about the pros and cons of the other types of filters. I'll just say I'm sticking with HEPA. And so then I think we're going to see interesting things with benzene, but that's one to watch for over the weekend with
EIP. And then the last area that I think I really want to touch on, but briefly, is with the pandemic. I'm speaking remotely via Zoom. I love the in-person experience. I think a lot of people do. I'm very grateful that you're willing to have me on Zoom today. My wife has a rare blood clotting condition that makes her very much more likely, multiple dozens of times higher likelihood of getting a blood clot than an average person. And that, combined with concerns about long COVID and other issues related to COVID, causes us to be very cautious. And I think, though, that a lot of public spaces are made much safer if we look into CO2 monitoring, if we look into HEPA filtration, if we look into ventilation. And I think that we can pass legislation that would upgrade the air quality in our public spaces, and especially, though, I think we can get a lot of benefits in the highly polluted areas like Pittsburgh, which already has high levels of pollution. HEPA filters help a lot of things. I believe that they would help with cognition, with school performance, with school absences, and other things that we're already running into problems with just the particle pollution. But when you add a layer of COVID-related pollution on top of it, and think of all the absences that we get from a little bit of COVID here and there, maybe it's not acute for you today, but maybe it takes you out of school for a couple of days. Maybe give it to someone else who is out of school for a week or two, or gets long COVID, and then they're out for weeks or months, or maybe they pass away. And so I think that paying attention to that issue has a lot of opportunity for improving social justice and equity across a wide array of the population. And I really like to include that. Haven't figured out how to do that in the context of the Inversion documentary, but I appreciate you giving me a chance to talk about it here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the sad thing is that COVID did force us to look at our air quality inside our buildings in ways that we had really neglected, just taken for granted, never really thought about. And suddenly we're all thinking air filters. And I know here at this church, one of the hurdles that we ran into is how little actual data there is on the filters in large public spaces like churches and concert halls and schools. And
Yeah, there's not a ton of data. It's hard to find. Fortunately, and it looks like you guys put in a link to the CDC has developed guidelines for how to improve air quality in buildings that I think creates like a backstop for some common sense things. They talk about HEPA filtration. They talk about keeping your CO2 levels low. That improves cognition in particular. That's actually what I meant earlier. Like, particles can impede cognition as well, but CO2 levels, keeping those nice and low, that means your ventilation is doing better. And so all these things can play a role. Glenn has mentioned in the chat that UV filters in the HVAC system. There's a great study that I need to put into my links. Someone a researcher went and took a close look at the pros and cons of all different types of air remediation systems. I'd love to share that in the links, because I'm not qualified to speak to some of those nuances, but there are people who are diving into it, and I really think it's great to dig into these questions. The other thing is, I wanted to just mention one other little anecdote, which is, I remember the day that I had my first drink of unfiltered water. I was way up high in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and someone said, "Oh, it's high enough. You can just dip your cup in the stream here and you can drink from it." That was a peak moment for me. I remember it to this day. It was so delicious. I loved it so much. I think of it now as like being in a crowded room with people and not being masked. For me, it's like a peak experience that I don't have anymore because of my concerns about COVID. We would bring tablets to purify our water. We'd bring water purifiers up in the mountains to purify the water so that we wouldn't get giardia or something that would give us some stomach upset, might make us throw up for a couple days or something like that. Maybe worse, maybe longer. But we take precautions to prevent even mild illness in our water. And I think there will come a day when we look back on today and say, gosh, why didn't we take very common sense precautions with our air the way we do with our water to keep people from getting, maybe it's just a stomach flu for you, maybe it's a long COVID for you, but to prevent illness across the population, I think there's so many measures that we can take that are just analogous to water purification that we just or hand washing that we're so used to now. We just got to move the dial on getting used to some of these precautions.
Yeah. Mark, I used to live in Denver, so I have a pretty good sense of what inversion is, but that's involving the Rocky Mountains. Can you describe what's inversion here in the Mon Valley in Pittsburgh?
Yeah. So weather inversion is when there's cool air that sort of warms as it goes up, but it's trapped by a warmer layer up above. So basically there's a layer of air, and because of the temperature differential, complicated physics that I'm still learning, the air doesn't move up higher than that. And so it traps the air close to the ground. And that means it traps the air, but it also traps the particles, the pollution, the gases, all this stuff gets trapped. And especially in an area like Pittsburgh, which has these river valleys, you find that especially if the inversion is lower than the peak of the river valley, lower than the mountain, height is, then you just get these narrow areas that are trapped and filled with the pollution from, well, we have lots of polluters in the river valleys. And so that pollution just gets concentrated, sometimes by 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, sometimes 10 times the pollution that you get in a little area that's, with that pollution trapped, compared to when the air can just flow freely up into the air. And the weird thing is, when it happens, the air often doesn't blow in a prevailing wind direction. So a lot of times you'll see monitors that are tracking pollution blowing from west to east away from the pollution source. But when there's an inversion, often the wind can blow northward very slowly or swirl around. And so it's very possible to miss these monitors that are placed to catch the prevailing wind, because inversions change the wind to non-prevailing. But it's when it's an inversion that you get these super high concentrations. And so I think that there's not enough attention paid to that unique issue. And that's what's been a real motivator for me to get and put these monitors out in places where there aren't monitors that the health department has there, in part to show the health department, hey, look, there's a real opportunity to protect health if you put out more monitors and build your laws around even more monitors, not just these few. And they've gradually taken that encouragement, I think, to heart and put out more monitors. They've also, I believe they purchased a bunch of purple airs, but I haven't seen them roll that out in a public way yet. So I'm really excited that it seems that after years and years and years of me and so many others advocating for these low-cost monitors to put in these places where the big monitors don't catch, I think we're seeing some movement from the health department. But we had to really show them with our own time and the money from the community and some foundations to make that case.
Oh, that's great. I actually went for the next question, which is, why isn't the health department doing more monitors? Well, it sounds like they just needed a kick. Several.
Yeah. I think that the health department, I can't speak for the health department, so I don't know why they might be slow on a thing. I do know that I talked to some government folks, I think from Colorado. I went to a low-cost monitor conference, and the regulators in Colorado were all about low-cost monitors. They were really excited about them. And I came back and found that the health department wasn't particularly receptive to those conversations. But in time, they became more receptive. I feel like the health department is trying to, again, not speaking for them, but my interpretation of why they might go slow sometimes is because they're in between. They might get sued from multiple directions. USDA will sue them if they have too strident a ruling or something. And then, community groups might get upset if the health department isn't pushing more strongly against U.S. Steel. And so in this sort of middle ground, and I've heard, not the health department, but I've heard some government officials say, they feel like they're doing a good job if everybody's yelling at them from opposite ends. I don't know. I would wish that they would do more listening to the communities, to the canaries in the coal mine, and go and visit those communities, visit Clairton. Whenever I visit Clairton, most of the time I get a headache in my forehead because the pollution is so strong there, and I'm not used to it, and it hurts my body to be there. And I think it changes your approach to regulation potentially if you're just down there a lot to experience the physicality of it for yourself. And that's why we try to get EPA to come out here and talk with people and visit. But only when you're down here a lot do you encounter this sort of the horrible smells and the physical sensations just of being part of this pollution, and realizing that maybe the regulation isn't sufficient to do the protection that we think it's doing.
Well, you're tapping upon something that I think a lot of people somewhat get confused about is where is so the Allegheny County is monitoring air. Great. Where is their power to fine when they, to find the coke works or impose fines when there's violations? And how does that interact with feds and the EPA? Who's in charge?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm developing information about that for my film. I'm not a lawyer, but so I don't want to speak incorrectly here, but it's my understanding that the EPA has granted regulatory authority to the Allegheny County Health Department as a special cutout for the Clean Air Act regulation. And so generally we'll find that it's the Allegheny County Health Department that's doing the air quality enforcement, and the laws are written by the EPA. I think that there are various levers that are set in terms of levels of fines and other things that are set. I don't know. I think that there may be adjustments that can be made at the county and or the state level, but I'm not certain of that. And I think we need to folks like the Clean Air Council and GASP and others who have lawyers on deck can speak to that more closely. And again, I'm trying to work on chapters in my film that sort of block it out, and I'm going to cross-check it with all the right people and then sort of tell that story.
Yeah, because I mean, I've heard of stories in other states where they want to get help and they go to local, state, feds, and it's really, for your average citizen who's suffering, that's an extraordinary process to keep being told, oh, sorry, you hold, no jurisdiction, not us.
Yeah, and to think that someone like me paying attention to air quality issues as a storyteller since 2016, I'm still reluctant to lay it out exactly so, because it's so complicated.
Yeah.
And I don't want to misspeak. And so it's complicated. It could probably be explained well by someone who's, just paid most of their attention on that. I've been trying to do a lot of my focus on doing a lot of the listening and the storytelling. And then, and so the way I get the ground truth on that is I don't talk off the cuff about it, right? Just yet, but I make a film to help tell that story.
Well, I'm going to wrap things up. We've gone a wee bit over, so I want to thank everybody for the extra time, but it does seem just extraordinarily important. I have to say, I was at an event a couple of weeks ago where there was a national speaker who said, how Pittsburgh's air used to be. And when it came my time to speak, I was like, no, there is no used to be. It still is. It still is. But that is the perception, as you started saying, there is, better is not good enough.
Yep. Just because we started at just an unfathomably bad level of air pollution doesn't mean that improving upon it is good for us or healthy for our children or healthy for our population growth or healthy for, the cognitive abilities of our students and young people and their opportunities to prosper and not be out of school because of too much pollution in the air, and too many asthma attacks. So often, and those are the brunt of which are borne by the poorest and most vulnerable, and a lot of minority communities have to deal with these things and the costs associated with them. I mean, go to the hospital once, get one bill from one hospital one time, and you'll see what a brush with the hospital can do to your finances. It can be absolutely devastating. Just at the moment where you're most vulnerable because you're desperately trying to stay alive or keep your child alive. And so, the more we could do to keep people out of those untenable situations, I think the better. And that's part of what keeps me motivated.
Well, on behalf of everybody, thank you. I know in this, unfortunately, this format, it's hard to hear the applause, but I have no doubt there is plenty of applause. Some of it is happening in the chat. But just thank you for doing this work. And please don't stop. If you feel at any point that you can't breathe, and I mean that metaphorically, please just pick up the phone to one of us, your fans, and we'll just keep you going.
Thank you.
I want to offer my gratitude to some of my wonderful, extraordinary lay leaders here who are working on our environmental climate justice program, particularly Bob Mitchell, who brought you to us, and Sonia Wellington, who's our event organizer, and along with Nancy and Jan and Becky and Madeline. Just you guys are all fabulous for making this happen. And for those of you smart enough to come in person, there is some treats and food for you. And Mark, I suspect you will get more questions and offline. There you go, through your contact information. And we really, really look forward to seeing your film.
I look forward to sharing it with you all, and I thank you all for all of your encouragement and your support. It really helps when I'm quietly editing, in my office for years on end. So I hope to do more of these presentations. If you know of a venue where you think that you'd like me to show up online, I'm trying to figure out ways to do more things in person safely. So I take one day at a time on that. And so please reach out to me. I'm trying to get the word out in all the different possible ways that I can. Thanks for your support.
Absolutely.
Keep telling the stories.
Yeah. Be well, everybody. And may you breathe deeply on a good day. Upwind.